Okay, so we live. We're here with Ryan Paul Gibson, founder of Content Lift. He's been running customer interviews in B2B for quite a while now, and we're here to talk about precisely that and how to leverage that in positioning and overall content strategy. So, yeah, pleasure to have you, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. Good beer.
Cool. So, the first question that I wanted to ask you, just to dive right into it, is who
hmm
is Ryan Paul Gibson, right? Like, what do people need to know about your past to understand who you are today? Most importantly, as a professional, of
Oh,
course. But if you want to touch on the personal,
who am I? Way to start with a softball question, Will. Who am I? How did like yeah, I mean 20 to 21 years in B2B, right? But I mean there's unlike most people, it's probably there's a lot in that and a lot of things I've done over the course of those 2 decades. I think how I got here to be like to answer the question directly. Um, when I started in B2B, I was just always inherently and instinctively just obsessed about how customers made decisions. I just had to understand because for a few reasons it's just inherently in me. But second, like how do I make choices about the business if I don't understand what they care about? How they make choices, right? So how do I influence those choices? Because that's the goal of marketing, right? Whether it's B2B or B2C. So I've always carried that with me. And then I think what's probably unique to me is that I took a break from the business world and I went and became a reporter, a journalist for 3 years in TV and radio. And that really gave me a lot of the skills that I use today. Like how do you actually investigate something and learn it quickly? How do you account for biases and all sorts of things like that? So I just sort of took that skill set and I brought that back when I went back to the business world, and I've just been sort of leaning on that and sort of my passion for customer understanding and customer research ever since. And it was 2 years, 11 months ago, I started Content Lift, and I've been going ever since.
nice. Yeah, I was about to ask you what made you start Content Lift. I've seen that you're also working as a senior marketing consultant at Rewind.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I'm sure that experience also shaped a lot in regards to the reasons as to why you started Content Lift. But
Yeah.
yeah, what are the reasons? Like, what made you start it?
No, one of the story, like having worked in the industry for some time, you and I've worked with mostly early stage companies, startups, but this is going to be true for a lot of companies. It was quickly apparent how shallow the understanding, founders and marketing teams and sales teams to a certain effect had of their best fit buyer. And by shallow, I mean, it's all very surface level. They use their doohickey for the, and this is why they want it. Which even that alone could be, them being their biases are skewing that. But it was really apparent because when I started working with like SaaS and tech companies, first thing I'd ask the founder, okay, so tell me about your customer and why they're coming. And when you talk to them, what do they say? Half of them couldn't even give me an answer. Half of them hardly even talk to anyone. So that was apparent there. When I went and started consulting for software companies at large, I remember one time specifically where I was talking to a product marketer. They had just done a customer interview, conversation with a customer. It's my jam. I was excited, so I just asked them like, "What'd you learn? What can we do to improve, our decisions in the business?" And they showed me like four sentences on a piece of paper about like, four really like basic learnings that we pretty much already knew. I'm like, okay, well they're just starting, so I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's go watch the recording of that conversation, like, and let's dive into the tape. Oh no, I didn't record it. So I kind of had a my spidey sense was from there was just like I think people are really struggling with this. So I launched Content Lift because I really wanted to help people, unlock the depth about their buyers and why they're buying and how they make decisions and why your solution versus all the other solutions and how they evaluate these solutions. Because that, if you can understand that, then you can start to put the building blocks of your marketing in place from the day that they're become aware of you and they didn't know you existed in the first place? And how do you incrementally and gradually push them towards a closed one, right? Of them using your solution. There's a whole process to do that. But you can't do that behind your computer screen and looking at a dashboard. You actually have to go out and start talking to people.
Yeah. Interesting, man. I think the software industry is also known like as a very technical one, right? And we always
Mm-hmm.
think of software as something that is only to be understood by developers and whatnot. And but I think these days, right, with no code and how democratized software has been, and most importantly, how much of a part it is in not only our professional lives but personally as well. Like I use software for organizing my
Yeah,
life, for thinking everything, right?
absolutely.
So in doing those customer interviews and in analyzing that process that goes from a complete stranger, completely cold traffic to close one revenue, and having been for 21 years in B2B, would you say that there's a bigger component, emotionally speaking, like a big emotional component than there was before in that process of in the buyer's journey from doing those customer interviews? And in short, the question is, how have you seen those customer insights evolve over the years?
So, and let me know if if I didn't answer your question directly, because I'll give you sort of my thoughts. It is different. Like the buying journey is different, but for me, my perspective, it's different around how we consume information and how who controls the flow of information. When I was in B2B the beginning, like I started when fax machines were what we used, right? Like one person in the office had an email address when I started. Like that's how long ago I started. My job is pick up the faxes, the paper from the faxes, and put them in a filing cabinet. That was my first job in B2B. So vendors controlled all the flow of information. And in some ways, they still control a big chunk of it. But I was relying on them for a lot of that information that was very skewed towards their tools. And then there's trade media, and I still had peers. What's flipped is now I can build it. It might, and to say that, it might take me like a couple months to build a short list of options. I can build a short list in 30 seconds, right, of possible solutions that I might want to use. And I can put one post on LinkedIn, ask a question about something, and I'll probably get 25 responses in real time. That did not exist 20 years ago. But your question was more about emotion. So I this has been my experience in B2B. I know people say that that people start with emotion and then they rationalize. I'm not saying it right, but that's sort of the intent. I think that's sort of true, but in B2B, depending on the type of product, you're still going to hit a wall of practicality. And what I mean by that is different depending on the solution and the tool and the business model you're trying to sell into and who's involved and how you the business processes you fit inside of that your solution does. There's going to be different levels of practical evaluation versus emotion. Good example, Calendly, right? Or calendar scheduler. It's a pain in the ass to like go back with emails. I don't have to think about it that much. $15, put in my credit card, I'm off to the races, right? Like the emotion of the pain around trying to schedule stuff is what drives that. But if I'm looking for code hosting repositories and I'm a software company, you know, is probably I might look at some new entrants into the market, but I'm probably going with GitHub for a whole bunch of like business reasons. So, there's this old saying, they don't, no one gets fired for hiring IBM. When I was growing up, that was like an old adage. Now I always say no one gets fired for hiring Salesforce because they're like the default tool for everything. So I think it's a balance of the two. Your job is to understand like how much emotion drives what you do and how much of like the business practicality drives what you do. It's a spectrum. So I think your job as the marketer is to figure out how to leverage both. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, it does. It
Okay.
does.
All
Which
right.
is what you said right there is like your job is actually to figure out how much of emotion there is in buying your solution, which you
Yeah.
cannot do if you get not if you don't get customer insights on an ongoing basis, because it's not something that you do. Okay, let's this quarter, right, because we need it and we're forced
Yeah.
to let's run some interviews, and then we'll run with those insights for 4 years more, right? It's not about that. It's more
Oh
so
God,
about
yeah, don't do that.
no, like
Yeah.
I think companies, I mean, they might think that people don't realize it, but you can tell when a company doesn't have fresh customer insights, right? Just from their
Yeah.
ads campaigns, you can tell from their marketing materials, you can tell from their copy, you can tell from a lot of places, right?
Yeah.
um in that sense, what do you think are the most common mistakes that B2B companies make in their go-to-market strategy when trying to influence the buyer's behavior?
Oh, that's a lot. So, I mean, the easy one is to say customer research, but uh, what I and I think that's true, like the depth of understanding. But I think it's you know we don't do a good job of understanding where we fit in their business model. So what I mean by that is, let me get back up to that example I just gave with GitHub, right? GitHub is not equal the process of software development. It just fits within the process of software development, probably DevOps or maybe some IT function, or they're working together with the tool along with the developer team. Like it's not equatable to the whole thing. It's part of the thing. So you have to figure out where your solution, whether it's a service or a product, fits in that business model, right? And how do these problems manifest over time? How are they trying to solve these problems? Why? How do you contextually position your solution against all these other things, right? How do you get their attention in the beginning, and how do you incrementally push them along towards a solution? Because the balance is you have to get in front of them and show them a process they're doing already and how you fit in or how it can be better, because most companies are looking to improve a process, and then you have to convince them that you're the tool for their specific business model over all the other things. We talk about go to market like it's just this thing we're going to spin up and it's going to land, build a landing page, spit out some ads, write some content, it all come out in the wash. But that's not the case, right? A lot of what we do takes 3 to 4 quarters to materialize from an investment standpoint, especially if you're doing things like webinars or talks, or even an ABM strategy, right? Can make take maybe 2 quarters. So you have to lay the groundwork of how these things incrementally progress. I hope that answers the question, but that's how I look at it. Because you ask go to market, I'll tell you. Well, I've done research projects on how people define go to market. I've had people tell me go to market is just cold out is cold calling outbound. That's go to market.
I'd say
So I mean,
there's many ways to define it, I think, and I've looked it up
yeah,
as well to try to educate myself a little bit more and whatnot. And I learned this from the, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but the founder of GTM Partners. Um, I think your go to market strategy is just how fast and how smooth do you take someone from a complete stranger to a loyal buyer, right?
yeah.
Just
And
and
what
in
are
some
the
way,
incentives? Yeah, and what are the incentives, right? Because there's a term that we've used in marketing since dinosaurs have roamed the earth, which is called the 4 Ps, right? It's product, price, placement, promotion. Maybe you're competing on price in your go-to-market strategy, right? You are the incumbent that's just cheaper than everybody else. Now, there's things you have to do in that, and things you cannot do in that, because your cost of acquisition, has to be very low, right? Whereas you could be the Cadillac of the thing. So how do you go to market with that, right? So there's all these things you have to think of, but that's why it still goes back to the business model that you're trying to attract, how you fit into it, and how you support what they're trying to achieve within that process, because that's where you build your go-to-market strategy. And I will say, a lot of times we think this is all in the founders, but I mean, if you just deconstruct the word marketing, it's market. How you're talking to a market. So it's the marketing team that has to sort of influence the market and then bring them along for the ride.
agreed. I mean, in early stages companies, you would think that also like a lot of founders have to wear that hat too. But still, yeah,
Yeah.
when we talk about companies, it's all like sometimes the marketing team tends to not maybe take full responsibility. Is that what you're saying? on that end. They
They
might,
don't,
yeah.
or they don't realize they have to. There's a lot of reasons why people don't do this type of work well. Like I've encountered every reason in the book. Sometimes it's what you mentioned before. It's a technical world. There's that mentality of if we build it, they will come. That's always existed in entrepreneurship, and it exists in marketing to a degree too. Like we just think we can ship things and people will want it. Sometimes you're not allowed to talk to customers. You get blocked by sales teams, CX. They say we already talked to customers. Well, they do, but they're focused on a certain part of the customer journey. One's focused on closing high intent deals, like acquiring and closing. One's focused on the customer experience and ensuring there's no churn. They want retention, they want expansion, right? They're not focused on sort of what happened before buyers got to you. They don't know how. Maybe marketers don't know how to do this. Maybe they're treated as the arts and crafts department, right? There's all sorts of reasons why they might not do this kind of work. My mantra is always, without it though, it's going to be really hard to build a pipeline of customers over the long term that's repeatable and predictable if you don't understand how to sort of get in front of them and bring them along.
Yeah, and what are the emotions that go through in that process? How do they feel at every stage? And it's very different for
Mhm.
different personas. You'll find pretty quickly, I think, that you not only find answers for your best customer, but also you start to see patterns in between different markets that you're targeting, and then that also applies to segmentation. That also applies it's all
Yeah.
interconnected, right? And I think you were mentioning before that one of the biggest mistakes that B2B companies make in the go-to-market strategy is that they don't think too much or enough about how they integrate into the process that they're trying to improve in the business model that they're trying to get into or sell into, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's probably, I don't know if you read the book. I mean, I haven't myself, but I've heard of it and I've listened to a lot of her podcasts. Hillary Carpio from Snowflake, she wrote a book
Oh
called
yeah, I know
Busting
her. Yeah.
Silos. Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the reason why I think a lot of not only the product but then internal teams as well, marketing, sales, customer success, all that. Part of the reason as to why we're so misaligned is because we live in such an individualist society, and because working together and working with people is actually hard. Like it's not
Yeah, it
that
is.
obvious to do, right?
Yeah.
So in that note, in having that in mind, what would you say are the crucial steps that someone that's trying to conduct an effective customer interview
Yeah.
cannot miss?
So I break everything down into five parts, right? When we're doing this type of work, you hear different phrases, right? So qualitative research, customer interviews. It's all sort of the same, right? One just has more of an academic feel. Customer interviews is a bit more of general jargon. So I look at five steps. One is you got to figure out what do you want to understand. So, when you are in your quarterly reviews, your annual planning, weekly stand ups, whatever it is, if you if you're struggling to make a decision, or there's metrics you're not hitting, or you realize there's gaps in your intelligence, right? That is the key sign to say, okay, here's a part of the business that we want to go try and fix, and insights from our buyers and best fit customer we think will help inform how we make a decision around this, right? And it could be as easy as your landing pages are only converting at 5%, right? So that, or sales team is telling you, we're struggling to close these types of deals. We'd love to close these deals, we're only closing 10%. Help, right? Those are key indicators that probably something is off. You need some more information about how you're communicating into the market. So what do you want to know, and what do you want to do with that information? I call it like setting research objectives. Second part is you got to identify who you're going to talk to solve to get the insights for this, because not all customers and buyers are alike. Someone who's been your customer for 5 years is going to give you much different insights than someone who's been your customer for 5 weeks. Someone who's closed lost versus someone who is closed won versus someone who is in market and has never heard of you. All those people can give you different insights to improve different parts of the business. So who are you going to talk to? Next, you got to conduct it, which sounds easy. It is not, I assure you. I've run over 1,900 interviews, and there is a skill to them, right? There's ways that you're going to try and reduce your bias, their bias. There's ways to activate their recall, because people don't remember things when you ask them questions almost instantly. Like there's like you send me a list of questions ahead of this, right? To sort of get my brain going, right? There's a reason we do that. Is because we want people to start thinking and recalling information that we want to extract from them. Because it's not so much about them answering key questions; it's about the process of you extracting the information you need. And there's not that doesn't happen instantly in interviews. There's ways to go about doing that. So it's you got to conduct that interview. Then you got to go through all the results and codify them, is what they typically call in research land. But it's really just like themes, patterns, right? What are the trends? You got to go through those, highlight them, figure out where you want to put all the information, figure out like what fits into what bucket. And then lastly, you got to build actions out of them, because the best research is going to do nothing if it sits on a shelf, digital shelf. And that's what happens with tons of stuff, right? There's all these projects we do inside companies that never see the light of day. You actually have to say, here's an insight. Here is the actual step we're going to take in 3 days. Who's responsible, what we want the outcome to be, and how we're going to measure success on this action. Like, draw the line. I do that in my work with clients, because otherwise, it's just going to sit there and collect dust. So those are the 5 things that I like to think of when it comes down to customer interviews.
Love that. Love that. I didn't know you run. I didn't know you run so many interviews, man. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah,
1900. You know,
so far.
uh, I thought I did a lot of interviews with founders for video. I still way like long way to catch up with that. But interesting, man. Really interesting. I want to dive deeper into when you said like you gotta conduct it, which sounds
Yeah,
easy, sounds simple, but there's a lot to it,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
what are you mentioned there are ways in which you can maybe intuitively or counterintuitively conduct the interview so that you extract the information that you need, which of course you
Mm-hmm.
need to figure that out before, right? Like, what is the
Yep.
information that I'm after? But once you're in the field, right? Because a lot can happen in an interview. The customer is not necessarily looking to give you the best insights, or like they're just there because you maybe, well, in some ways forced, but most importantly, like in a lot of cases it won't be forced, right? It's just like they're
Mm-hmm.
there because you told them to meet and whatnot, and they want to help, but a lot of people just don't know how to, right? And it's
Yeah.
fine, right? They shouldn't. But how do you conduct that? How do you keep the frame? And most importantly, I want to know in your case, what are some of these strategies that you've been implementing throughout your career that you found most useful when trying to extract the best out of a customer?
Yeah. There's a few, and I'll list a few off. Um, what I'll say before I give you the answer. My answers there, though. I think one of the mistakes we not mistake, but one of the mindsets we have that I think we need to sort of get out of our brain is that it's like this friendly chat, right? Like you and I having a friendly chat. It's great, and it's gonna. Your objective is to make the environment feel like that when you're doing this type of work, but that's not your objective, because it's not about making them feel at you want to make them feel at home, but your objective is to like systematically pull at things, right? So you can learn as much as you can. So it's going to feel like you're talking to customers, but it's actually an investigation, right? It's just there's a nuance to it. Now I have the benefit of having done a lot of them, so I have like a muscle memory how I would do this. But I'll give you some tips on like what I think you can do. First is setting the stage, right? That's no different than like breaking the ice in any type of call, right? What do you talk about? Like, hey, how's it going? You can use the old weather thing. How's the weather where you are, right? But find ways to connect with the person quickly and match their energy and show that you're just a human that is just really interested in learning about them. Safe space type stuff, right? Like you want them to feel like it's an environment where they can share, because you probably will probe a lot into their business, right? And they want to be able to trust you with their answers. The second thing is, I don't look for opinions. I don't care about people's opinions. They will come up naturally in the conversation, and that's fine. What I care about is behaviors actions and timelines. Because when I was an investigative reporter, that's what I cared about, and then I would get an opinion for like the sizzle reel, and opinions are great for testimonials, but opinions are subjective. I liked this thing, great, but like why they liked it could be dramatically different than why someone else liked it, right? And it's hard to find relevancy, um, and what they'll call like insight saturation, so where you're hearing consistent things over and over again. So, behaviors, actions, that's what I care about. And the reason I care about that is that aligns with like that business process I was talking about. I want to understand like what are the things they're doing in the business to achieve certain outcomes. So that's a second thing. Third thing is, um, try to bring people back in time as much as you can. What I mean by that is if you ask a question, and I'll often say, like, let's start at the beginning. When did you first realize there was a problem happening with X? And they'll say, "Oh, okay." And then what they'll do is they'll talk about something, a 3-year time span in like 1 minute, just instinctively. That's what humans do. So like, you will want to bring them back to like where you want to go to next in the conversation. And they'll say, so that question, what were the problem with X? Oh, well, this was happening in the business. We were blowing our budget on this. I found you, and then we implemented it, and it was great. Awesome. Okay. I want to go back to that answer you just gave a few seconds ago. You said you're facing this challenge in the process. Let's start there again. Walk me through why that was happening. Right. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing people back. I'm trying to stop them from going ahead in time because I want to get that process on the actions they took. And the last one I will say is, um, just listen as much as you can. Like you're doing a great job of it right now, right? So it's really hard for people not to interrupt and actively listen. So that's a skill set. It's good practice just for life. But the more you can actively listen and allow them to speak, that's really going to help you, because the silence, sometimes people they'll naturally fill things with the silence, and they might give you some insights that you otherwise would not have had. Those are some tips.
Awesome. No, they're really good.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of commonalities between customer interviews and running a sales call properly in some
Oh
ways.
yeah, absolutely.
Especially the discovery part. It's so much like that, right? It's like you gotta be actively listening, gotta be able to be okay with silence, which a lot of people aren't, right? And it's really important because otherwise you don't let people to express themselves. Although I should say, and we were talking about this in a comment section earlier this week, I think, how a lot of customers drift off really quickly and they
Yeah.
can start giving you subjective opinions, right? As we were talking before.
Yeah.
And in that case, you want to set the frame and bring it back, right, as you were saying, to what you want to talk about. But in most
Mm-hmm.
cases, if you are asking the right questions, then drifting off or rambling, so to speak, it's a good thing in a lot of cases, right? Because and I think you got to give them the benefit of the doubt too, right? Like, and correct me if I'm wrong though, but you never know what insights you could get from that, even if they're could be labeled as too qualitative, right, and not
Yeah.
so objective. I think there is some market insight to be had there, and that a lot of companies might ignore by default, especially in software. but I think it's really interesting, right? Because that could give you, I don't know, an idea for a creative, right? Or an idea to how to change your syntax in X marketing material, stuff like that, right?
It can change everything, right? Let me give you an example. Like you mentioned I work part time with a software company called Rewind. I've been working with them for 5 years. They're a great company here in Ottawa, Canada, where I live. And if you go on my website, Content Lift, there's a case study I have with them, because they had gone through an acquisition of GitHub, and we just mentioned GitHub. So they had a GitHub product, and Rewind's value proposition, like their product, is backup and recovery for SaaS platforms, like big ones, right? So like GitHub, Shopify, Confluence, Jira, and the business intelligence they were actioning from the founding team of that GitHub product that they acquired, they were using to go to market with, and the sales team was just like just their hair was on fire because they just weren't closing a lot of the deals. You know, they were having conversations, they weren't lining up with what they imagined they would be. So I got tapped to go and figure out what was happening. And what turned out was there was a key part of I talked about that business process, right? There's a key part of the process of something they were trying to do in the business that we just didn't really understand was happening, right? Which is basically people were trying to spin up their own version of Rewind in house and failing miserably. And we knew why they would fail at that, but we didn't understand the level at which people were trying to do that and they were failing. So we did some rewrites of all sorts of stuff, right? The marketplace um, listing, some of our landing page, a lot of our ads, just and we would just pulled their words from the interviews and use that to push back into the marketplace about the problems, and so they could see the problems that other people were experiencing reflected back at them. And when we did that, the installs doubled within a few weeks, just because of some 7 conversations, right? There was still a lot more to learn that we realized after the fact, especially as the company wanted to move up market, which most companies typically do after a certain number of years and they get to a certain revenue scale. So there's always more to learn, especially as you go into new markets. Like right now, I'm building out their sales enablement program because their average deal size has gone from 4,000 to 40,000. And that's a different beast altogether to try and sell into. So they need help at the sales enablement side to help activate those accounts. So I'm helping them do that. So but my point is, those conversations can have such a dramatic effect on everything you do and how you spend your marketing and sales budget going forward. And you're just making more precise calls around how you spend your dollars rather than just sort of throwing darts into the ethers and seeing where if you hit something.
Right, and it was all, as you said, just 7 interviews, right? As because it can be downgraded so quickly, right? Like, you just did 7 interviews. Well, not that easy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Definitely,
I mean, and you can turn
definitely
that
not.
around if you have your act together. I've returned insights around in as early as 9 days, right? Deep qualitative insights in 9 days to then go start figuring out how you're going to start revamping and overhauling your marketing or add to it, or just making tweaks. Because sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you're close. You just need to be a little closer.
Hmm. Um, this is a good question here.
Okay.
Why and how do most marketing teams suck at running customer research? And I don't want you to like be mean or anything to marketing teams or anything, but just let's try to understand what are the underlying reasons behind the widespread company centricity that we see in B2B in a lot of
Yeah.
cases. I won't say that is the most common trend ever, because I think these days more and more companies are realizing that there are a lot of commonalities, or that there's a lot that they can learn and pick up from B2C marketing, and how it's done, and most importantly how that is so highly tied to how a customer thinks, and how they
Yeah.
feel, and what they're resonating with. So, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So I started touching it before, but there's a lot of reasons, right? One of the big ones is they don't know how to sell this type of work, right? Executives care about. I've been on a leadership team, and there's always a lot of anxiety, not anxiety, but you're always concerned about how you're implementing your resources. Are you using all of them effectively? And everyone in the company is vying for either more money or more time to do something, right? But you have to connect the dots of why the thing you want to do is helpful for the company writ large. And the reason I say that is if you go to an executive, say, I want to spend 4 weeks talking to the customers to improve the website messaging, who cares? Like, why? Now, you know why as a marketer. Like, you understand the value that can bring. But does the executive team necessarily understand that? And why should the product team needs this over the next sprint? Sales team wants this, and CX needs help here. So why should you not fulfill those asks and go do this research project? All right, fair question. So how I would put it back to marketers is you have to talk their language. If you instead say, listen, we were looking at the data, the landing page conversions are from organic traffic to demo request are, at 13%. We think that's low. We want to try and get it up to 20% over the next 2 quarters. We want to go and understand how we can improve this messaging. I want to talk to sales and CX about what their thoughts are, and then I want to go talk to a few customers. Much different, right? Than how you saying, I just want to go do this thing because I want to do it. No, no, you're helping everybody. So you have to understand how to package these things, right? And that goes for all your marketing activities. How do you build a business case for it? People don't know how to do it. Research, that one I've learned time and time again. They think it's just talking to customers, but it's a process, right? It's a process of a deductive investigation. So how do you do that? A lot of people struggle with that. Same with surveys. Like there's a lot of times surveys are even, we use them more, and sometimes I see questions surveys and I just want to hit the floor because there's just tons of leading questions, right, that aren't going to help you in any way, shape, or form. um, People don't know how to be unbiased. They don't have time, right? That's another one I see. All the, like, everyone's just drowning in tactics. But I would say you're drowning in tactics and trying to get things out the door because you probably haven't done this work of deciding which tactics to focus on. People talk about they don't want to bother their customers. Maybe they've done it before and they just haven't seen the value, or they just don't know how to use the insights. A lot of this is what I think is one I've experienced with a lot of researchers, where especially ones who come from like an academic market research approach to things, they're very good at like deep intellectual analysis, but then they can't translate that into like, okay, well, what do we do now with my ABM program tomorrow, right? And how is it going to generate 5% more qualified leads in the pipeline for sales, and how are we actually going, like, how are we going to execute that and get it done? I've been in business for 21 years and I am not the best marketer, Will. I'm probably above average, but I can take those things and I can action them, right? Because I can look at something and say, "Oh, this is what I want to do now and test this." Because with this research and everything else we've learned, I have a hunch that this can incrementally lift the dial. So those are a lot of the reasons I hear about why people don't do this type of work.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned, right? The last part you said is pretty interesting because I think because when you said I've been in business 21 years and I want to do this stuff, I'll know how to do it, and when I do it, I action on it, which is the most important thing, right?
Yeah,
Um, I think one of the underlying reasons behind that, like why people might not action or might not be, because it shows that you're excited about it. Like and when you collect those customer insights, you actually want to, okay, let's see how this fits into new strategies, new programs, new whatever, right?
yeah, yeah,
And I think that stems from a place of actually genuinely wanting to build something that people want, because
yeah, probably.
and if you actually care about that, it all comes so easily. It
Yeah,
goes with your natural flow of behavior, so to speak. Whereas if you're building something just because you thought that people needed it, then it's counterintuitive for you to go out and, okay, let's see what customers have to say. Well, if in the first place you build the software or you build the tool or you build the company or you build the teams and all the
yeah,
infrastructure just in order because you thought it was needed, or just because from your intellectual perspective and your experience is like, I know that the market needs this. It's a place that a lot of entrepreneurs come from, I think, and that it reflects across all teams, I think, right?
I think you're right. I mean, that's it, you're unpacking the question of like, how do you get people to care about the things you care about? And that's a tough question. I don't have an answer to that. I think that's been a struggle across the business world as long as I've been in it, right? Because there's a lot of people that will listen to what I've just been talking about for the last 40 minutes, and they just will roll their eyes and not give a crap. And I don't begrudge them. Like, I have a different, I sort of had just, I operated a different sort of mindset. And I'm not saying it's better, it's just different, right? Like, I I've always had that drive to sort of understand things. Like I just need to know how these things work. So that's really lent itself well to me, right? Um, I think maybe what's if there's anything in that, and I'm a leader, like a leader, a manager's director, executive, find the people that sort of gravitate towards that mentality of like wanting to build and ship things and understand things like they're builders, and then partner them up with people who are processy, just tell me what to do, people, and I will pull the lever on the machine every day at the same time, people. I am not one of those. Like I struggle with you know that whole, I'm better at it than I was, but years ago, but I operate better within like the discovery build ship world as opposed to mature process world. That said, the process I use for mine, since I'm very passionate about what I do, like I'm very precise with how I run customer investigations. I have a guide on my website, and it's pretty thorough around like each specific step of how you would do something. Because what I want people to do is be able to like replicate that. They say they don't need me; they just need my knowledge, right? And they can go and they can replicate how I do work, and they can reap the rewards of doing it. So yeah, it's tough. I think, but part of it is me. To your point, um, so maybe there's just some people that will never approach it the way I do.
Yeah, I realized this when you said I'm the kind of guy who needs to know how it works. When you said
Yeah,
that part of the reason why people don't do this work is because they need to conduct it, and conducting an interview is a lot of deductive thinking and
yeah,
going one question after another and another and another and another, and going deep, deep down to the even almost philosophical reasons sometimes, right, as to why people do the things they do.
yeah,
Um, and I mean, I resonate a lot with that, man. Like I think I've always been like that too. I have that insatiable curiosity for knowing the root cause of it all, and where that stems from. Sometimes it can get kind of degenerate because you actually go back into like sapiens and like, okay, well, how are we shaped, like,
yeah,
in our minds, why not? But it's interesting still. To not get deviated though, because I don't want to make it about us, I guess, or
yeah,
like
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
philosophical matters. Was once interviews are conducted properly, how what is your process to analyze and organize that data? And if you can talk about the specifics of that, right? Like
yeah.
in which software, with how, like what are the sections, and then once you have those sections, how can that be actioned, and embedded into those feedback loops of, whether that is marketing, customer success, or sales
Yeah.
strategies.
So for analyzing the data, um, there's different ways to sort of do that. Especially in the qualitative world. I use a term, it's going to sound funny. It's called content analysis. And it's like the most basic way to analyze and codify qualitative insights, right? Um, and that's essentially just going back through all your data and bucketing things, putting them in categories and themes that you've decided are relevant. That goes back to like setting the stakes, right? Like, I talked about like figure out what you want to learn and why. I often call that like setting an objective. That guides, what you're going to bucket things in. Because if it's, the thing we just talked about, like we want to increase the conversion rates on a landing page. Okay. So what are the parts of a landing page that we think are need help with, and what are all the insights that I can bucket in various categories, right? So like messaging, positioning, voice of the customer work, the jobs they want to get done, what are the problems they're facing, why is it, how are we helping them solve that problem, right? And you're finding the common threads and themes. It's a Some people are using chat gpt to do that now, or other types of AI. I've tried a bit, it's okay. I find you lose a bit of nuance in that. So I still like to sort of take the analog method, but I know that it's starting to speed up with like what the machine can learn. But at the end of the day, that's how I would approach it. And then how do you then create a feedback loop with marketers and like the team and build that in strategies? Well, it really depends on your team and like what resources are available for you. Like, so for the case study, the example I gave, it was just me and the product market manager. We just spun everything up instantly, right? Because we could. So we're like, right? But as teams grow and other people have more involvement, there's things that you need to do to be able to communicate these types of insights. So one method is, have a central repository that people actually use. I don't mean like sitting in a Google Drive or in like, a shared server somewhere. I'm like, if you have a central wiki, whether it's a Notion or a Confluence or even just like something in Slack, you put everything in a Slack channel and pin it, right? And that's like the thing, because that's a central operating system that people can continually revisit. That is where you put that stuff. Because if it sits somewhere where people are not going to access it quick, like on an ongoing basis, they're going to forget. Make sure that when you're in meetings, you call stuff out. I've done that where we're operating with old knowledge, and you respectfully, right? I would say things like someone would mention a profile that we want to target. I'm like, oh, just want to remind you, actually, we switched that after the last round of research. We want to go after these people. You do it respectively, because that takes time to permeate those new ideas through a culture. Because if, say, you've been targeting a certain buyer for 2 years, but you want to make a shift, or you've had a certain messaging framework or value prop or whatever, right? If you're changing all that now, but people are used to it, it's going to take time for that change to sort of permeate through the organization. Um, and then finally, you want to go back and visit the impact that you're having with these insights. So, did we actually change the conversions on this landing page over the course of 2 quarters? Right? How are we gauging the feedback from this? These insights. How do we determine if we were successful or not, if we made the right calls? So those are the things you have to sort of put in place as you move forward with insights.
Interesting, interesting. I love how, yeah, if it needs to be on a Slack channel and pinned, and that's where people are gonna see it, just put it there, right? Like, even if
Yeah,
it doesn't look the best or whatever, like, who cares?
yeah. I don't care about
Um,
that in the beginning, right? Like what I care about is like people internalizing these things, right? So they can
mhm.
everyone can make better decisions.
Yeah, you mentioned ChatGPT earlier, and I'm super glad that you mentioned it now because I've recalled the other post that you made a few, like,
Oh yeah,
I don't know, yeah, a few days ago or something about
yeah,
that integration with Zapier. I want to talk about that. I want to talk. It's not
sure,
in the questions, but let's touch on it because I think it's important. Like how to leverage tech and AI
yeah,
and generative AI, most importantly, in all of these processes, right? Like you built, right? Just for context, you built a chatbot, or not
yeah,
chatbot, but like a Slack integration with GPT, with Zapier, right? Slack, well,
yeah.
GPT to Slack and Slack to GPT, right? And
Correct.
that GPT chat is based on, I'm assuming, a lot of resources that you've done through with customer interviews and whatnot,
Yeah,
and it can be personalized company by company, right? And you
yeah,
ask questions to it, and then it can give you like pain points of a certain buyer persona. It can
yeah.
talk to you about the positioning and whatnot. How are you using that? How that came to be, and when you build it, because I know you're not that much. Maybe I'm wrong though, but it appeared to me that you're not the most technical person in the world,
No, no,
and I'm
you're
glad that
right.
you.
Bang
Uh,
on.
I'm glad that I'm glad that you were able to build it because I'm not either the most
Yeah,
technical person. I really love Zapier for that and other tools too that
yeah.
have democratized automation and integrations and whatnot. So yeah, I'm curious to know what would you say about that and how it's been helping you so far.
Yeah. How it came about was sort of what we just touched on is, things living in, digital no man's land. That happens all the time. Like when I was hiring consultants, reports and, thoughts would get just cataloged somewhere and never see the light of day again. And that doesn't sit well with me, because what I want to be able to do is have people be able to access information almost instantly. And when I spent a lot of my career in house, you spend a lot of time looking for things that you need, right? whether that's like a case study or a blog or something, right? Like we're always searching for information. What is our OKR again for last quarter on this thing? Like there's all these types of data points that we need internally to help make decisions. And my thought was, well, most of us use some type of an operating system like Slack or Teams or what have you. What if you could just get action, you get the data there? And the other part of that was, if anyone's seen anything on how content people and marketers are using generative AI, it's trying to produce blogs and maybe 1,000 LinkedIn posts or whatever, right? So, or like an outline that you can then put into a brief and that you can ship to a contractor to write something. What I've never really liked about a lot of that stuff is you're relying on ChatGPT to sort of source its public information and build you something, but is that information contextualized to your buyer? Maybe, maybe not. So I was like, well, my whole thing is collecting first party data that's highly contextualized to how a buyer makes decisions. We've talked about like how I do that in my philosophies. What if I could just access all that in Slack in real time with my teammates? And that's how I found the integration capabilities. And what I'm doing is like you can just go on Zapier's website and it'll show you how to do that, right? Like the integration side of things. But my driving force for that, like what's the problem you're trying to solve there? It's like, well, I want people to be able to access information in real time, right, and make decisions quickly, because that's what's important to me. We don't do research for the sake of doing research. We do research for what it affords us, and it's be able to make better informed decisions about how we spend our money. So that's sort of why I built the Slack GPT integration. Yeah, I'm not technical. It took me a few reads of and a few videos to watch on YouTube.
Yeah, man, I can relate. Super interesting, man. I love that integration. I love that and most importantly, the problem that it stems from, right? Because it seems to me that you're focused on the problem, not the solutions, which is kind of the point, right? Like you're focused on understanding why people do the things they do in terms of in the context of customers and B2B. And I love that because that's how you come up with the best answers, in whatever time span or whenever it's needed, right? It's by focusing on the problem and that root cause. Just out of curiosity, will you be selling access to that to that integration?
Oh
Just you won't, right? I mean, I think it's good to encourage people to build their own because honestly,
yeah, I want people
that's
to
kind
build
of the
their own.
point.
Yeah, I had someone say they messaged me on LinkedIn, and they're like, "You could package all this for $20 and sell it."
You
And
could, but
I'm not saying that's not appealing. Like, and maybe I will do that in a few weeks. There's other things I want to do with the business. Um, but I want my preference, honestly, Will, is the integration is just another tool to access the data that people need. I'd rather have people work with me on that part of it than necessarily integration. But I know for me, I just look at it as a value add for clients at the end of the day, where it's okay. This report that I build for you and all these insights are just going to sit somewhere. I want you to be able to access them as quickly and use them in your work day to day to influence what you're doing. That's more what I care about. But who knows? Maybe in 2 weeks you'll see a Ryan's new course in ChatGPT Slack integration.
or yeah, of course, or yeah. I mean, you could build an arm you know, I mean, I think the most appealing part of that would be to offer it to, which you're doing already, to content lift clients and personalize it based on their data, and have that integration as part of your service, right? Which I'm sure you're already doing. So I think that's already super appealing, and that's already giving you a lot of ROI, so to speak, on building the
Yeah,
integration, right? Um, just to wrap up, I had one last question to ask
sure.
you, which is how can sales professionals profit, or not profit, but how can they make the most out of customer insights? Because um, and you said it before, right? One of the main arguments that salespeople do or make when they're presented with these ideas of doing customer research and all that is like, we already talk to customers, right? Like I spend
Yeah,
my life talking to customers, I spend my day talking to customers and whatnot, but they're not talking to customers in the same way that you would on a customer interview, right? Of course, they
yeah.
actually are doing. sometimes quite the opposite. But so how can they make their own sales processes, pitches,
Yeah.
structures, discovery, whatever, all that better through customer insights?
Okay, let me tell you a story. If that's okay in the last few minutes. So, um, and I agree. Like salespeople do know the customer better than marketers usually in the beginning. Like I'll never disagree with that. But you're right. Like they're talking in a different context. But when I started working with Rewind, I didn't understand anything about the world of IT and DevOps. You know, a term called we rely on now, or we try to own, called backup or data recovery strategies. I had no idea what those were. I learned by talking to the customers and going through sales calls, seeing that term pop up. You know, in about one quarter of the deals, and they were the ones that aligned with the highest average contract values, who were lived up market, who we wanted to attract. So I'm like, I want to go understand more about this business process. Like this seems like it's a big thing. So how does this work for sales? I had a meeting with a CEO, um, or sorry, VP of marketing, a few weeks ago, and just so they're just trying to be a bit of a uh, give me a rib, but they're like, this Rewind, I would never use them. Like, sell me on Rewind, sell me right now on Rewind, and they were like laughing because we were having a friendly conversation, right? So I said, okay, here's what I did that I would not have been able to do a year ago before doing all the research. I said, okay, well, tell me about what's your tech stack. And like, oh, okay, well, we use this, and we use Jira and Confluence. Okay, what's your data recovery strategy for Jira right now? Oh, okay, well, this, and this, and this. I'm like, how many users do you have? This. Okay, well, how much data do you have in there? Yeah. Okay, what would happen if it goes down? Oh, we would do this and this. I'm like, okay, well, this doesn't sound like you're ready for us yet. Typically, we work with a company that's about 100 users in Jira, and this is the type of data, like, it's customer discovery, right? Like, I sound like a salesperson that's doing like cold outbound customer discovery. I didn't know how to do that well years ago, but now I know how to do it. So that's why I think those things help salespeople, because they know the talk track now before they get to the person who has high intent and is ready to buy. If they get someone that is just sort of, what is this about? That's a different sales conversation. And that's how insights can help the salesperson close that deal. Does that answer the question? Is that good?
It really does. It's a really good story. I love it.
Thanks,
I
man.
think, yeah, you were able to hit them with the data points that you were mentioning before. We always try to search for. We always are searching for data points that we need in order to to
Yeah.
do our job properly, right? And to actually perform whatever, be aligned with the market and flow with the market motions. Because I believe sales these days is more so about going with the flow of the buyer's behavior rather than trying to interrupt it in any way
Yeah.
possible, whether you're doing interruption marketing or not, right? But
Yep.
um that's another conversation which we could have. But I think, I don't know, I mean, I have more time, but I would like to touch just a little superficially, if you want
Yeah.
to. You already touched on this, but just the shift in B2B buying, right? And the overview, big picture of all this, and how I think organizations, well, you can call it vendors, you can call it organizations, you can call it whatever, but just big enterprise has lost, well, I mean, they have a lot of value. I'm not gonna shit on them, whatever. But it's clear that the that the main average user now has access to a lot of information that they used to not have access to, right? And we're seeing it
Yeah.
with TikTok and other social platforms becoming more of a search engine than even Google at some points, right? Most importantly, when Google is now powering their search with Bard, so that
Yep.
most of the top results are not even appearing anymore, right? And it's crowded with Google Ads. Well, whatever. What do you think should be B2B companies take out from that shift?
Oh,
And how to go from being, hey, I'm a traditional B2B company that has done, traditional marketing for their entire time, and like, I don't want to die. I want to do this whole thing, but I want to do it right, and I want to do it without submitting completely and losing our track of as a company and our culture and all of those values, which are good, right? But because I think a lot of companies are trying, but by trying and by not knowing how to do it, they're not helping themselves. So
Yeah.
what would you say to that?
So can you rephrase the question like just really quickly for me?
So basically, how can what is the main takeaway that B2B companies should take away from this whole B2B buying shift that is happening in regards
Yeah.
to social media being the main source of truth or of information these days?
Oh, I don't know if I'm the best answer. So I'll take everything I say here with a grain of salt. I mean, I think you have to have your pulse on sort of where the winds are blowing. I think you have to really be precise in how you're speaking and consistent. It's so easy to just go in a thousand different directions. And you have to realize that everything you do now is transparent. I can take a screenshot of something and share it in 5 seconds and tank your stock price, right? Like, there's, I think you have to be very genuine and transparent about like what you do and what you do not do. There's so many options for a buyer now. They can do anything. They can spin up their own AI Slack integration in 5 seconds, like I just did, right? Talking about like it's the buyer has all the choice and freedom now. So I think you have to really understand how you fit in the world and really make smart choices about how you go to market.
Love that. Yeah, I think the conclusion to that is the more powerful a customer can be, the better companies need to be. That's it. And it's paradoxical because, but yeah, it's how it works, right? And I'm here
Yeah,
for it because it's after all, you get rewarded for it when you do it right. So yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Okay.
in all ways. Well, it's been a pleasure, man. It's been really really great to have you, and hopefully we'll have you later on. For anyone that's has enjoyed the episode or whatever and wants to look you up, where should we redirect them to? Your LinkedIn, I guess. But
Uh,
yeah,
I live an unhealthy amount on LinkedIn, like most people probably do. So Ryan Paul Gibson there, and then contentlift.io is my website. Feel free. There's some free stuff there. People want resources to help them with customer interviews, but I'm always around if they have any questions.
awesome. We'll see you around there. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Will.